Welcome to Checking In with Dr. B, a space dedicated to live conversations with those who have found and live their joy. Today we welcome Laura E. Scheele. Laura, Elaine Scheele, is an Indiana native, wife, mother to three wild and wonderful children, and a lifelong word nerd. Her love for language led her to writing, and in 2022, her poetry was published in Bouquet of Stars, Poetry Chapel, Volume 3, Chelan Harkin and Friends. Prior to writing, she was a professional singer for the Catholic Church, and prior to that, a kindergarten teacher with an education degree from Indiana University. Music and education are common themes in her poetry, as well as hope and nature. Her goal with her writing is to continue to use it as a platform for good. She hopes to educate about and shed light on things sometimes unnoticed and unseen around us. Laura believes that her job is to cause pause and awareness with her writing. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Hi, hi, hi. It's so good to see you. So good to see you.
And you, as always.
Well, congrats on the book. I have it here. I've been reading it.
Wonderful. Yes, very exciting. I brought it over too, just in case.
Okay, good, good.
Wanted to make sure people knew the name Bouquet of Stars.
Yes, Bouquet of Stars. That's wonderful. Laura, could you speak a bit about your journey in life and what brought
Ab-
you to this moment?
Absolutely. Yes, I would love to, because I am what people might call a late bloomer. So I think it's important that people hear that story. I had no idea as a child that I wanted to be a writer. It never dawned on me that I would be a writer one day. I did always want to be a teacher, and I was, but I was a really sensitive child. I found magic in everything, but that also meant I was a pretty emotional child. And I learned at one point to kind of push that aside, kind of put that away in a box, because that's kind of how you survive and be normal, right? You have to put away the sensitive part of you, the softer side. And it wasn't until 2020 when emotionally I kind of broke, as many of us did. And that part of me kind of broke out of the chest. And suddenly I had all of this emotion I had no idea what to do with, and this craving, this starvation for magic in my life. And I went kind of on this quest, this search to find magic again in my life, and to channel those emotions. And that's when I found writing. And I wrote furiously. I just wrote and wrote. First, it was children's books, and then that kind of turned into poetry. And I had this pumpkin patch that I had made of poems that I had nothing to do with. It was just there, and I was lost. I didn't know what to do with any of it, and I started sending it into publications. There wasn't much success with that. And then maybe divine intervention, I don't know. I came upon this ad on Facebook, from this already well-published poet, David Tennyson, asking for poets who were looking to get published but didn't know where to begin. And he said he was going to be publishing this book with a mystic poet named Chelan Harkin. And she's from the United States, and I started looking her up, and she was brilliant. And I thought I wasn't even close to her level, but why not? I sent in some poems, and he responded, and I was shocked. And he chose me and 11 other just really gifted poets from around the world to work with for the summer. And in the end, we would write a book. And that's when the magic really began, because I met these other poets, and they were so inspiring. All of them so different from me, but all of them so gifted. And we started encouraging each other, helping each other find our voices. And in the end, the poetry that came out of that was really miraculous. And I found my voice. And what I was writing by the end of that summer, just 3 months, what probably would have taken me years on my own, was something I was proud of. And it was such an exciting thing. It all happened so fast. But yes, out of it came Bouquet of Stars, and here we are.
Is there a particular poem that really describes your journey that you can share?
Well, I do have one I could share, yes, that talks about that idea of maybe we don't always know who we are gonna be, and it's okay to change your mind along the way,
Uh-huh.
and become somebody more authentic and more yourself. So I would be happy to read that one. It's called Superhuman. Here we go. All right. Superhuman. It's magnificent that, as humans, we have the unique capacity to completely reinvent ourselves in the middle of our lives. Imagine, for a moment, a hippopotamus in his big mouth glory exclaiming, "Water is no longer my thing. I think I'll grow wings and learn to fly, to live a weightless life." Well, no, I don't believe that could be. But by George, a trash man can earn his pilot's license, and boom, the trucks are history. It's magnificent that there are no rules in stone to claim you must stay exactly who you are right now. Even the characters of the Bible changed their name. Julia Childs learned to cook at 40. Harry Potter was born of a midlife crisis. All this to say, your heart might always beat the same. Birthmarks and genetics may hold their place, but you can live a life that's truer. The timid can be the teacher, the judge, a humble servant. You can do this because you're human.
Hmm. Beautiful, beautiful. I one of the lines in there that I love is your heart might always beat the same.
Mhm.
And and I know part of your heart is your family. Yeah.
Yes.
How have you
Yes.
how have you balanced this movement to being your poet self along with your children and your husband and the family itself?
At first, that was difficult. That was not an easy transition because I had defined myself as a stay-at-home mom, and I had defined what that meant. And I felt a lot of guilt kind of stepping back from that role. I think what's been exciting, though, is we've now kind of brought them in and made them part of the process. And they my oldest daughter, she's 8, she has this sudden love of writing, and she comes home from school with these huge stories she's written about horses and cats, and she's showing this desire to write that I never had seen in myself as a child, and, I hear her saying things like, "You're an author," and being proud to say that, and that there's nothing more fulfilling than hearing your child be proud of you.
Amen.
So, it's though I have felt some guilt, and I did have to put, my son in an extra day of daycare and things like that, and I there's part of me that hurt, but watching the fruits now with my kids, being excited about the writing, it feels worth it.
You spoke about yourself as a child, not um, writing. Can you speak about your early childhood experiences and how perhaps that led to today?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, my older sister, she is one of my greatest friends. Huge personality, loved to read, just devoured books as a child, and also loves to write. And she will, I can tell you right now, will write a novel in her lifetime. It's going to happen. She is also a teacher and she's very busy with that. But because early on she was older and she was kind of seen as the bookworm in our family.
Hmm.
She kind of was given that role in our family. That was her trajectory. And I was kind of more social, and that was kind of the role that I was put in. And nothing against my parents. I think every parent wants to celebrate the gifts that they see in their children. But the gifts that we were given at Christmas time kind of aligned with those things. And it's kind of how I defined myself. I was the socialite, and she was the one in school, the one who thrived in school. And I also have ADHD. So I was not a great student. I was an average student. I did okay in school. My teachers liked me, but I was always average. And it wasn't until college that I really found myself thriving when I got into something that I was very passionate about, which was education. So I didn't define myself as that person, and neither did my family, which is part of the reason it took years to get there.
Yeah, you said that you found your passion in college, being in education. And I know that you were a kindergarten teacher. How has it been now to kind of maybe move away from formally being in the classroom to being a little more in the periphery?
I think it's a special place, especially as a former teacher, because eventually a dream of mine would be to write a children's book. And because I think I know a lot about the children's perspective from my experience there, I think it could really help me on that path of knowing where there are needs, where there are lessons that aren't being taught possibly in the classroom that could come from books. So I think it kind of gives me an edge in that space since I've been there.
Right? Do you have that experience?
Mm.
Along
Mhm.
the way, have there been poets or writers that have inspired you?
Absolutely. The very first was Dr. Seuss.
Hat in the hat. I love it. Love it.
I loved Dr. Seuss, and I loved reading Dr. Seuss. I liked the way that he made up silly creatures that didn't exist, and the way that he asked the readers to think outside of the box in all of his writing. And the way that his writing could be used so well for an educational tool because of the rhyming. It was so easy to memorize it. So I used rhyme often as a teacher because of Dr. Seuss as a tool. Because when you have a rhythm and a rhyme, you're much more likely to remember what you're reading.
Yes. Do you incorporate music into your poetry, or does it play a part in your poetry?
Yes, it does. The first poems I ever wrote were all very lyrical. They all kind of followed a syllable scheme and a rhyme scheme because that was what I was used to.
Mhm.
And so you'll find in my poetry now there's still some of that flow, that musical flow in a lot of what I write. It's hard sometimes I try to escape it, but it is how I think. It's where my mind goes automatically as to a more of a musical poetry, which I don't mind.
And
But
it's beautiful. It's beautiful because I was reading, I think, one of them, and it felt to me like music. Well, it was music. Let me see where I found it. Yes. Yeah. When you say, but just like an intricate pipe organ, a tool for grace, it plays its part. We are not gods or giants, just simple strings of harps. That to me speaks to music. It's not only in the words, but in the rhythm. So I see how you merge the poetry and the music there. Are there other passions that you bring into your life, into your writing?
yes, and more and more that is true. Now that I have found this platform where, I've got a few people paying attention, I'm wanting to use it for something more than just a path to self-promotion. Self-promotion alone doesn't fulfill me, and it doesn't without meaning, I don't really find the joy in it. Having that group of people in Poetry Chapel, I found that joy because the meaning was that connection, that community. But when it's just me writing, I need that meaning still. And so I'm finding myself writing about things that matter to me, issues that matter to me. And the big one, because I'm a masochist who really wants people to like them, I've started to write a lot about gun violence. And my hope, my goal in the future, near future with that is to actually start a for profit. I've chosen gun violence because it is not because I'm a masochist, but it is an issue dear to my heart. Um, I, because when I was a kindergarten teacher, I was teaching students on the Near East Side of Indianapolis. Sadly, a lot of the students in my classroom, their lives had already been affected by gun violence in one way or another. They knew someone who had been shot. They knew someone who had been affected by gang violence, and that was sad. But I also was a kindergarten teacher during the Sandy Hook shooting, and I was at school that day. I had just stepped out of my classroom, and another teacher came out and told me, and then I had to walk back in to my room of kindergartners, knowing the weight that an entire classroom had just been murdered. And that profoundly affected me. And then a few years later, I was at the Lauderdale airport when a shooting occurred. I was hunkered in a corner with my two little girls, and 9 people were shot on the floor below me and killed. So because of this, it is an issue that is part of me, and it's why I need to take it on, and not in a way that I want to take everybody's guns away. That's not my goal with my hope for a non-for-profit. My goal is to use the non-for-profit as a way to use art as a tool to change the conversation about guns and gun violence, because guns are a part of our culture, and they're a very sensitive issue. And so I want to approach it with a sensitive lens, not from a place of anger, but from a place of let's try to understand each other. Let's talk about how we got here so we can start making the small changes that can eventually lead to the big changes in the way that we think about guns, the power we give guns as this tool for manliness and protection rather than what it has been for our country.
Often here, I find ways of bringing joy. Is there a way in this deeply, deeply, deeply felt area to bring joy into that?
I absolutely think there is a space for that, because a lot of what guns begin for children as a toy, as something that they're using in their video games, as they creep in very quickly. So one way that we can help that is to find a replacement, something that does bring joy, that does bring empowerment to children, that isn't a gun.
Right.
So yes, that is really the goal, is to find something that brings joy and empowerment that doesn't have to be violent. That would be one of the main goals behind this my movement.
Yes. And do you see who do you see involved in the movement if you had your ideal?
I want to get as many diverse members of our community here in Indianapolis as possible. Obviously, I want artists because I want to use art as the medium. I want to use art as the way that the word is being spread. But I want there to be teachers. I want there to be police officers. I want there to be lawyers represented in this that have seen it firsthand, know what it actually means. I think if I go from a place where we're all the same and we're all looking at it the exact same way, I'm not going to be able to make any difference.
Right. Right. Do you see a role for children, for our young people in it?
Yes. Yes, I do. Um, a thought that I had, because I know there are writing programs, particularly Butler has a writing program that they do with children over the summer. I would love to get children writing about their experiences with guns and what it means to them, what their understanding of the concept of guns and power and violence and what that looks like in their world, because I think to really make change we have to understand what children are seeing at the most basic level, how they understand it, because that can help us to peel back the layers of how we understand it. That's where it all begins, at that primal level.
Right. But I wonder, you spoke about using artists and so on, and going back to your poetry, how do you approach a subject like this? How do you incorporate it into your writing?
From a place of sensitivity and also comparison. One thing I've tried to do is think of other things that we could compare guns to, because so quickly we hear the gun and there's a certain idea we've already made in our head, and either we shut off, or we're angry, or we're sad. There's so many different emotions that gun can bring. But
Mhm.
if you can use something that isn't a gun to make the comparison, then the walls aren't automatically put up. You can get that aha moment before the person realizes what they're actually reading about, learning about is guns. And that's the beauty of poetry, is that what you can hide in it.
Do you have any examples of things that you've written that where you have that hidden gem?
Gosh, I don't have any of those poems right here next to me right now, but I did. I wrote one about a dragon that
Uh-huh.
was in someone's home, and it was their pet dragon, and it meant so much to them. And they couldn't see the harm in the dragon because this was something that they loved. This was their pet, and it went on to how the dragon, as it got older, it because of what it was, it harmed. There was some harm that it caused, and um, the family, they loved their dragon so much they wanted to hold on to their dragon, but they also, didn't want it to cause harm. And so, yeah, it was just this battle, this internal battle they were having, not wanting to lose their dragon, but also knowing that it was harming people. So that's one little example I used. It was,
Well, now I
um,
want to know what happened to the dragon.
well, honestly, I haven't finished that poem.
And I think that's going to be part of the foundation, that you establish because we don't know the answers yet. We
We
don't know
don't.
the answers. And that's why I think you're saying that we have to come together
Hmm.
and find the answers so that we're not fighting against each other in terms of I want, you want, we want, or we don't want, and
Hmm.
find that make that journey, travel the world
Hmm.
and find the answers. I
And
think
that's why as I go through this, I don't. I don't want to do it completely alone because I want to hear from every side of this issue. Obviously, I don't have a positive context with guns. I have no positive context. So that's why I want to make sure I'm working with people who also have used guns. They maybe have guns in their family and they have been something that also has this heirloom or positive story to go with it because I can't finish that story without both sides.
Yes. So at the end of it, we have, hopefully, we have a happy ending for the dragon, for the family, and the people affected as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
It's going to be an exciting number of years coming up. Very busy, very,
Yeah.
very busy. What with the writing and the foundation. But can you give us an example or give me an example of a time that you think of that was joyful in your life and what that experience was like?
Oh, so when I was young, we lived in this little neighborhood in Berlin, Germany. And what's interesting is, and this is just how my brain works and what I've learned about myself over these years of writing, it was actually a very hard time for my family. My parents were going through a divorce, but we had this forest right at the edge of our neighborhood because what's wonderful in Germany is the forests are just right in the city. And we would go on these long walks, and my sister and I would just disappear in these worlds of pretend in the woods. And we had so many magical stories that we came up with. We were animals, we were fairies, we were free. We were free, we were children. There was no big, scary, sad responsibilities over our shoulders. And I remember those times really well because of that, just that feeling of magic in the woods and freedom. And I think that's why a lot of my poetry still goes back to nature because of the way that it has this ability to bring out magic in you that's hidden deep under the surface, just being around it. Mhm.
Magic in you. What would you tell someone who perhaps wants now to go into writing, into poetry, into some one of the arts? How would you advise them to try and find that magic?
Give yourself permission to be alone in quiet and just start. Because sometimes I think one of the hardest things is starting and giving yourself permission to do it. Don't be afraid of starting with bad writing. It's okay if it's bad. It's going to be bad because you're just starting. Any kind of art, it's going to start bad. So you have to give yourself permission to do a terrible job first. But you have to take that time, that space by yourself, whatever it looks like, because for some people it looks like being in a cafe where there's other people around in white noise. For me, I have a trouble with that because the music gets in my ears and then I can't hear my own voice. For some people, it looks like sitting out in nature. For some people, it looks like a quiet office where you can just focus. But you've got to find that quiet space, whatever it is. And for writing, I think sometime one thing that I found that helps me is to start writing a conversation I'm having in my own head. It doesn't come out as poetry sometimes, it just comes out as a conversation, but little by little, it morphs. Sometimes it does come out as poetry, but I have to have that space and allow it for myself.
So you give yourself permission to be yourself, to take
Mhm.
time for yourself. As the airlines would say, you put on your mask.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Because it isn't, yeah, it doesn't just happen overnight. It is a process. You've got it, you have to go through growing pains.
What
But
what
if
do
you
you
allow
say? Sorry. What
no, no,
what
no.
do you say Or what do you do on those days when nothing's happening and you're not feeling it's not flowing? How do you keep going?
The author of Eat, Pray, Love, I watched a TED Talk that she did once, and it was really brilliant. She talked about how she doesn't think of inspiration coming from within her. She thinks of it coming from an outside source. And for some people that's God, for some people that is whatever their spiritual divine entity may be, but they she believes that it comes from outside. So on those days when she just doesn't, it's just not there. She says, "Okay, it's not here today. My inspirational troll is not with me. So we're gonna move on. We're gonna do something else." She might, sit down, write something not great, but she says, "Okay, not today," and that's all right. There are going to be certain days that just you don't feel it. You don't have the juices going, and that's okay too. And I have days like that.
But on those days, do you still write? Even though the forces seem to be against you, you still write.
I do. I make sure I take that time. And a lot of times, what I find is that when those waves of inspiration do come from wherever they're coming, suddenly these things that I wrote little bits and pieces of that just didn't feel very good, felt choppy, I'm using parts of them in the poem that I actually end up writing. And it was all coming, but it just came slower.
I feel what you're saying because as a musician, sometimes I hear something and
Mhm,
that little piece may come back at a different time in a different way. But
mhm.
it's that core idea keeps going and you
Yeah,
say, maybe there's something there. But I
yeah.
think getting down to the essence of what you're saying too is always be consistent, even when those days when you don't feel it. Save that
Mhm,
space for yourself.
mhm. It's very important. If for nothing else, it's therapeutic to be able to take some time away from all the noises of the world because our world is so noisy and let your mind be and let your mind think its thoughts. It's so important.
Yes.
Mhm.
Logging off from the world, one would say.
Right.
In 5 years, 10 years, what would you like to see? Where would you like to be?
That is a really good question. And it's one I have asked a lot recently because I think it's changed recently for me. I would like to see that I have published a book of my own. I would like to see that. But yes, I would also like to see that I am making a mark. And I never used to think that's what I wanted. When I was a kid, people would ask me what you wanted to be when you grew up, and I'd always just say happy.
Hmm.
But I've learned that my happiness comes from meaning. As I said that earlier, I have to feel that there is something meaningful that I'm doing in my life. And so ideally in 5 years, I would like to see License for Caring, my non-for-profit that I've starting to be a real thriving non-for-profit. And I would like to have published a book. I get so much joy from my children. And I think for a long time, I felt guilt in saying that that wasn't enough to fulfill me completely. Because being a mother is the greatest gift I've ever been given. But every person is different. And it is also okay to say, I need more.
Yes. Give yourself permission.
Mhm.
License to care. That's
Mhm. Mhm.
license to care. because
Yes.
it is sometimes we don't allow ourselves that choice.
Mhm.
Laura, it's been so wonderful speaking with you today. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to speak about?
Ooh, I feel though we've touched on many things. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for the place that I am today. Um, and I want to make sure that I mention that because a few years ago, I was in a dark place emotionally. And I kind of felt that I didn't have much purpose in the world. And I've had a lot of really wonderful encouragement and help in these past few years that has brought me to where I am now, to be able to have a direction, to be able to say, I see myself somewhere in 5 years. That is something I don't want to take for granted because I'm really, really grateful for all the love and support that I've been given, especially from my family, from my husband and children.
That is wonderful because we all need that support
Mhm,
and even on the darkest days to know that we are lifted. And
mhm,
sometimes we don't realize how much they're lifting us and who is lifting us, even though they mightn't be next to you or next door, anywhere near, but
mhm.
still the voices and the care is
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Laura, this has been really, really, really amazing. And I look forward to License to Care, the foundation. I look forward to reading more of your poetry. And I know I've enjoyed reading your poetry in Bouquet of Stars.
There's some also really other wonderful poets in there for anybody who is looking. It can be found on Amazon. And I appreciate you so much, Doctor. It's been such a wonderful time, and I'm so glad you decided to check in on me. And you are always such a light, such a bright light, and a joy in my life. So thank you so much.
Oh, you bring me joy. Again, thank you for checking in with Dr. B, and we'll see you not too far in the future.
I hope not.
Welcome to Checking In with Dr. B. In addition to our video podcast, we invite you to join our Jumpstart network at keepyourjoyandrise.com. There you'll have access to questions and answers with our guests, virtual meetups, and opportunities to suggest and participate in workshops and spur of the moment talk and jam sessions. We are creating a community of positive thinkers and doers. Come join.